So after my quick harvests, I often just get a little tray, fill it with some water, and then park myself in front of the television or a podcast or YouTube and go through the vermicompost. What I'm looking for are big woody bits that probably won't work their way down in the next couple of months. In our garden, that means a lot of pine needles. If I happen to spot any cocoons, I'll throw them in as well. And of course, I'm looking for those big breeder-style worms who are going to continue to deposit cocoons in my castings tote instead of back in a worm bin where they belong. So in this video, I'm going to fast forward through me rummaging through this vermicompost from Cinderella, and I'm going to show you the results after 2 different days of doing this. This really doesn't take long. It's not as physically difficult on my body as sifting. And like I said, if you've got, somebody on the telephone or you're just listening to a television show that doesn't require a lot of watching, you're able to pull out a lot of worms, cocoons, and woody bits in a relatively short period of time. These castings were remarkably clean, but I always have a rag nearby just so I can wipe off the castings and take a break if I need to. In this case, I started out with my left hand here, and I decided just the position, it would be better doing it with my right hand. Oops, there's a cocoon. So I dusted off my left hand and carried on till the end with my right. So my tip is to try to keep one hand clean. You need it to fast forward through commercials, or to switch to another YouTube video, or to hang up on that telephone call. So settle in, and I'm going to show you the results of my second go round of going through these castings first, and then I'll show you the big amount that I got with this first pass through this vermicompost, I guess. And what I'm looking for is it to be castings after these worms that are remaining, and of course the active microbe in this mixture works through the rest of the smaller bits and not these big chunky bits. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward a bit, and then I'll show you the results of pulling worms and cocoons 2 days in a row. So I've rotated the picture here so that you can focus in on just the tray of worms and cocoons and the more chunky bits as I add them. This is where having a bit of water in the tray comes in handy because the worms are not getting added to a dry container. These chunky bits are not the soft and cozy bedding. They are scraps of avocado peel that didn't get composted down yet, woody needles, and chunks of those flower stems. So by putting some water in the bottom of the container, I know the worms have a place to go where they're not going to dry out. You'll notice that now that I've got quite a few worms already in this container, when I do find a larger piece, like in that avocado pit, I try to put it in an area of the tray where worms aren't gathering because I don't want to dump something heavy on top of their head. That avocado pit may very well have worms inside of it, but I do try to be mindful of the worms that are in the tray and not introduce anything that could damage them as I go. Having said that, if I find a rock or a bit of plastic, I will remove that and set it aside somewhere else so it doesn't get returned to Cinderella, because everything in this tray, like I said at the end of the video, I'm going to turn it upside down and show you exactly how many worms I collected in this whole process. Just a reminder for those of you who may not understand that Cinderella is a unique worm bin. She gets unusual bedding. So there's flower stems and haircuts and road trip containers and cutlery. I've even found a pine cone in her. So I'm going to get a lot of chunkier material that's going to take more than one harvest cycle to break down. If I was doing this with one of my other worm bins, there's no way I'd be pulling out this amount of chunky bits. These are very well inoculated bits though, and there is no doubt that they will break down when I put them through Cinderella for another cycle. This is Why I don't empty a worm bin when I harvest it, because the worms like familiarity. They like the microbes that have been surrounding them and built up over time. It keeps the bin running really smoothly and turning over quickly if you don't let the worms start from scratch after every harvest. If you watched my previous video, you know I did sort of a very quick and dirty side migration. I just pulled 70% of the material that was not in the last feeding zone, and this is what I'm going through to find these worms. However, it did sit overnight inside my family room, so in a sense I'm also doing a light migration here. As I work my way lower into this bin, you'll notice the number of worms I start pulling out starts to increase, because overnight, and even I think with the vibration of me pulling worms, the worms have hightailed it to the bottom of this container. So I'm going to go down there and I'm going to find a lot of them as I start pulling them out now as I get down to the bottom reaches of this bin. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for those big breeders, like I said. If I happen to see cocoons, and I found many of them, I will put them in that bin, that takeout container. But mostly my goal here is to get the big guys out. I do keep this tote of vermicompost moist. I'll cover it with bubble wrap, and I'll even drizzle some food scrap juices in it from time to time to keep it microbially active. But honestly, the worms are going to be much happier going back to Cinderella. Remember, I gave them that great feeding, so they'll go down there and they'll help their friends out. My best guess is that this is about 3 gallons or about 12 liters of vermicompost that I pulled out of Cinderella. As you know, I've sped up this video, but it took me about 80 minutes to go through it, which just happens to be about the length of a typical movie. You just want to find a movie with good dialogue and not an action movie that you need to watch closely. To be honest, though, I have accidentally put worms somewhere they shouldn't be when I look up to see the screen and I end up dropping the worm on my lap. I've learned my lesson from past mistakes, though, and now I've got the container where I'm pulling worms inside the vermicompost tote so that if I do overshoot and drop the worms somewhere they shouldn't be, they will likely just find their way back into the vermicompost. In the past, I've cleaned up after doing this and seen a great big worm crawling across my carpet. In fact, I see a worm going over the edge just now, but I caught him and put him back. If you've stuck with me this far, I'm going to cut this video now right to the end when I put these worms into a temporary container for another night in my house, because I ran out of sunlight to get these worms out to Cinderella the same day that I pulled them. So stand by for a sneak peek of just how many worms I pulled out so far. You'll note how extraordinarily full this container is. I didn't feel I wanted to leave the worms in it overnight, so I dumped them into this larger container. You'll also see Landon holding a cell phone light over top of me because, like I said, night had come and I didn't have any light to see what I was doing anymore. So here comes the first look at these worms. Clean hand on the left. That's my slightly soiled hand on the right, but not bad considering it was almost an hour and a half of picking through vermicompost. I decided just to invert that container right over the worms, which will keep a little moisture dome in there overnight. I also left the room lights on to deter them from escaping back to the larger bin. First, I had to save that little wisp before tucking them in for the night. All right, this is actually batch number 2. I pulled out worms on a second night, and after this, I'll show you the worms that I pulled out on the first night. So you'll see there's lots of lovely worms from Cinderella's castings or her vermicompost, and so I'm just going to rinse out this little container. So this swirl of worms and wisps from that container that I stored them, that will just go over here on the bamboo side, container is clean of worms. Anyway, the second part of this video is the first batch, the bigger batch of worms that I pulled out of Cinderella's vermicompost. So stay tuned and you can watch it right now. So here I am out at Cinderella. Let's go under here and give Cinderella's worms into the feeding zone where I think Prince Charming is also buried. So I reviewed the tape and I'm pretty sure Prince Charming is in this corner. So let me just do a little bit of disturbing of the feeding zone. See if I can find him. Oh, no, sorry worms. Sorry, I guess I mistook him for this. Gosh, we'll have to find Prince Charming next time. All right, let's give Cinderella her worms that I pulled out yesterday evening while I watched television. Put them in this fast food container. Actually, this fast food container wasn't big enough. I didn't feel confident leaving the worms in there overnight. So these are the overs. You can see there's a lot of cocoons. No, I didn't have to pull the cocoons out of Cinderella's chunky bedding that is going to go in for another round. I didn't have to pull the cocoons. I'm going to sit the rest of this for a couple of months. But when I saw the cocoons, I pulled them out because they might as well hatch in Cinderella and go to work right away. All right, so let's just see what her worms did in this container. Here we go. There was quite a few, but like I said, it was a quick harvest. So, and I had come in after 15 days, so not a true baiting operation. But there's an alternative to sifting. Just spend a few hours watching TV and pulling out these beautiful worms, just one by one, along with the chunky bedding bits. They go back into the bin and back to work for me instead of sitting in my vermicompost tub waiting for the rest of the cocoons to hatch. All right, everyone. Bye from me and bye from Cinderella's worms.